Namaskar, I am Sandeep Chakravarti. I am an Indian diplomat. This year, 2022, we are celebrating 75 years of India's independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. During this year, we are highlighting the contributions of India and Indians to the world. In the success of India, I believe there is huge contributions of foreign relations and foreigners to India. In the past, we know of many foreigners who made India their home. We know of C.F. Andrews, we know of Sister Nivedita, we know of the mother of Auroville fame. We know many people who made and contributed to India. In more contemporary times, we highlight through this series, India is the world, the contributions of ordinary people, yet extraordinary stories of how they have made India, business with India, or living in India as part of their world. As part of the series, India is the World, I'm delighted to have with me today Adrian Mutton, who has just completed 30 years of his engagement, or should I say honeymoon, with India. Adrian, before I talk of Saharanpur, I would like to know about what you feel about Indian Railways and how that contributed to the making of Adrian Mutton that as we know today.
Well, thank you very much, Sandeep, and I'm honoured to be part of the India is Their World series as your first guest. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to talk a little bit about that 30 years. And as you say, the Indian Railways have been a big part of that story. I've travelled the length and breadth of this country, up and down the trains, in the early days on the rooftops of the trains when that was still possible. And my first major entrepreneurial journey was actually selling chai on a train journey from Saharanpur to Goa in 1992 because I lost my wallet boarding the train and I had no other way to survive. So I donned a Gandhi cap, took the chai pot and the kula cups and went up and down the train selling cups of tea to very bemused locals at the time. And I found India to be very welcome into that entrepreneurial adventure that I've pursued. And ever since then, I've had a wonderful affinity to this country and felt that if you can sell chai to the Indians, anything is possible.
But tell me one thing, you bought the chai from the chai wala and then sold it at a margin, at a profit?
Yes, I had to find ways of making enough money to survive when I arrived in Goa. So I had spoken a little bit of Hindi at the time, and in my broken Hindi, I managed to negotiate buying the pot of tea at what was 2 rupees a cup. And I would walk up the trains bellowing, chai, chai, garam chai. And when people would come to me and say, ha, do cup de do, I'd pour 2 cups in the earthen cups and hand it to them, and they would give me 4 rupees. I say, ne, 10 rupiya hai. And they say, kya hua? And I say, ye bahut acha angrezi chai hai.
Angrezi chai.
Ek cup 5 rupiya hai. And they were so bemused that they just handed over 5 rupees, gave it to me, and I pocketed 3 rupees per cup. Pretty good margin, I must say,
yes,
for a cup of tea. And by the time I got to Goa, I had enough money to survive for a little while before my next job in a beach bar in Goa. But my first early days of entrepreneurialism were probably my finest, I must say.
You have had an incredible journey. We will come back to the journey, but let's go back to Saharanpur. You were there yesterday in Saharanpur. Has it changed in the last 30 years?
Much has, much hasn't. I was absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to go back to the city after 30 years, exactly 30 years
yes.
that I was there. And I was welcomed with as much warmth by the Joshi family when I arrived yesterday as I was 30 years ago, as probably the first foreign guest to the city for best part of half a century, I would imagine. And I retraced all of my old steps around the wood markets, around the industrial zones. Of course, I visited the school and where my dormitory was, my own classroom. And I think there's a change in the perception of what is possible from the people of Saharanpur. There's much more energy, much more dynamism. But the hustle and bustle and the entrepreneurial activity that goes on within those markets when you get off the main roads is and felt like still very much 1992.
One transformation that I've noticed and I've read in some of your writings is the Joshi family itself. You know, when you went in '92, they were very conservative, and when you go back to them, you find them they're wearing jeans and they have a Land Cruiser, and you know they are visiting restaurants. Do you think that captures the transformation that we are seeing in India in the last 30 years?
Yeah, I think if you look at the conversation that we had over lunch yesterday with the family, their aspirations, what they've achieved over the last 30 years have been considerable. In 1992, it was a small school with just a couple of hundred students. Now you go back, they've got over 1,200 students. They have a fantastic library, sports facilities, and I think that what I saw in Saharanpur yesterday and what I saw in 1992 are very different stories. That family represent still very much India's heartland by tradition. They're still very traditional. They're still very respectful as a family unit, still very, very close. But they have forward-looking ambitions, and that for me is a big part of what India's future story is about. If you can capture that enthusiasm and those aspirations of a family like the Joshis in a second or third tier city like Saharanpur, then the potential for the next generation of Indians is immense.
You have been observing the Indian scene for the last 30 years. Do you find enthusiasm in foreign organizations to do business with India? Do they really see the potential?
What India has done in the last 10 years, Sandeep, is really tell its own story much better through the campaigns Make in India, Digital India, Skill India, Study in India. These are all campaigns that have captured the imagination of the world. They've been very professionally put together. They've been very professionally marketed. And so that the vision for what the country wants to become is now much clearer. The world knows that India wants to be a major contributor to the world economic story. Our job at my company, Sannam S4, is to go and tell the underlying story. What does that mean? How do you turn that vision into reality? What still are the challenges on the ground of doing business? And every country in the world still has its challenges of doing business. But India, more than many others, has the opportunity, and our job is to present the opportunity, help implement what needs to be done to fulfill that opportunity, and take care of any challenges that may exist that would otherwise keep those organizations from wanting to be more engaged in India than perhaps other countries for which they have a choice.
What I find, Adrian, quite impressive, or rather unbelievable, that you have made it a business out of hand-holding companies coming to India. Clearly, you have a successful revenue model, and clearly companies who can come on their own prefer to be with you on your side. I think it's quite an interesting model, and there are not too many companies like you. Now, tell us one thing. When companies come to India, what is their feeling about the education sector in India? Do you think that the new education policy that is being implemented will open the doors wide open for foreign campuses to come to India?
India's just gone through a major policy reform. You're right, the National Education Policy was launched in 2020. This has been a generational shift in policy for India. What the NEP clearly states is that India is open to expand and fully capitalize on what I feel is the world's largest knowledge economy. The fact that so many people in India speak English, the fact that the mind power, the brain power of the average Indian is so high. And what I tell the world when I'm speaking to them through various forums is, remember, there's a moral responsibility to help India with its internationalization agenda and with its own education story, because almost a quarter of the entire world's population under 25 are Indian. So if we do not get the education of that cohort of the globe's population right, we've all got much bigger issues than some of the ones that we're fretting about at the moment. So what we're trying to do with the NEP is help put the policy into practice, really help international institutions understand the opportunity, and also educate Indian institutions about how they can forge relationships that are meaningful, sustainable, and are going to make a difference to India's youth over the next 20, 30 years. And there are opportunities in abundance, but they will not happen unless there's a real focus and commitment to seeing them through over a reasonable period of time.
You started in India in 1992 when you were about 18 years, and now 30 years down the line, we see that the India story is part of your story. Your family is largely made in India, in the sense you have 3 children who were born in India. Your company's name is Sannam S4. Could you tell us something? Why did you name your company Sannam S4? What is the link?
Yeah, so when I first thought of the idea of setting up this business in India in 1998, I didn't want the company's name to just be an acronym. I didn't want it to be something boring. I wanted it to represent what I felt about India, which was vibrancy and colour. And I'm a big fan of Indian food. And I wanted us to be a key ingredient for our clients' success in India, but I wanted their brand, their products, their universities to be at the forefront and not ours. And so through much consultation and discussion, I realized that many Indians can name you a dozen or so mangoes, but every single day Indians are eating chilies. And they can't name you any varieties, just red or green, which I found amazing because there are hundreds of varieties of chilies. And what I realized is that the Sannam S4 red chili accounts for about 70% of India's entire chili crop production, and it's virtually impossible to keep that ingredient out of an Indian recipe during the course of a living day. And so I felt this was a wonderful idea to use the chili. I love spicy food. Mm-hmm. Obviously the vibrancy of the red chili, being able to use it in our branding, and for us to tell a story that we see ourselves as a key ingredient to our partners' success in India. But like the chefs of those recipes or the restaurants of those recipes, it's their name, their brand, their university that's out in front, and we're just the ingredient that sits behind the scenes.
These days we hear a lot about urban planning and rehabilitation of people who live in slums and Jhuggi Jhopris. So these days it's fashionable, and we see a lot of effort being put by the government. But I know that in the 90s also you tried to do that, and you have some experiences of working in the slums of Delhi. Do share something about that.
Yeah, so I tailored my academic interests. My degree was in geography at the University of Newcastle in the northeast of England, and I was very fortunate that they had professors who had real strengths in urban planning, in gender and development, and in population studies. And so I signed up to all of those modules with my primary interest of using them to come to India to do my research. So every holiday I was coming here, I was doing research, primary research, and as part of that it took me into the slums of New Delhi, and I got to see how these slum dwellers were living in the Jhuggi Jhopris, as they're known locally. And through that period I was given the opportunity to work on some projects with the Delhi Development Authority, and we were looking at resettling slum dwellers from inner city sites, from the banks of the Yamuna and inner city dwellings out to what was then empty land in Rohini and Dwarka, and building new houses with infrastructure, with running water and electricity. And we were also looking at some sites to upgrade in situ their infrastructure to give them a better quality of life. And that was just an amazing project to be part of for several years, and gave me a view of India's base of the pyramid.
So you are in quite many ways a pioneer in this kind of work. So my impression of you, Adrian, is that your knowledge of India is not superficial. From the Jhuggi Jhopris or the slums to the skyscrapers, you seem to have traversed all terrain in between. And when I met you first, in some ways I think you are still doing what you did when you started here, is bringing foreigners, foreign companies, giving them a tour of India, making them know India, and then pushing them to do business with India. I think more or less that is the mantra that you were following 30 years back and even today. So what is changed in your approach towards India, and how does your company deal with the new challenges and the future? What do you look forward in the future?
The philosophy remains the same, which is when you know how India operates at its grassroots, which I was very fortunate to have that experience and exposure. When you understand the people, when you understand the culture, the aspirations, and you are open to the challenges, you're not trying to work your way around them, you're not trying to ignore them, the opportunity is there, of course. There is an abundance of opportunity across multiple sectors. And so I've always considered my role to be their trusted advisor, someone that they can come to for honest advice, direct feedback. Sometimes I tell people India's not the right market for them. Maybe that they're not ready for it, their product, their service, or just their team and their approach to market entry has to be particular for this country. And so it's very much a philosophy that enables those people to sleep at night. Let me do the worrying for you. Let my team be the people that run around the scenes making everything seamless for you, and you just come here and bring your expertise, and if there's an opportunity here, we will help you fulfill that.
How does the role that your company plays fit in with the philosophy of Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat? Where do you find a match in that?
Yes, yeah. A lot of our work is in helping companies, not just the large multinationals who, of course, have enormous amounts of help at their disposal, but more towards the medium size and the smaller end of the scale. And our approach is to make sure that the work that they need to do behind the scenes is taken care of so that they can really focus on their area of expertise, whether that's manufacturing a product, delivering a service, or something along those lines. And what we do is, first and foremost, understand their opportunity. Is there an opportunity to produce their goods at the level of quality, at the level of scale, in a way that their intellectual property is going to be protected? Can we assure them that those three things are in place? If they are, we then find like-minded manufacturing partners for them, or if they want to do it themselves, which tends to be more complex, finding them the land, finding them the space to establish that footprint. If they're a service, the principles are still the same. Is their service genuinely in demand in India? Importantly, can it be sold at a price point that makes sense to them? And then how do they capitalize on that opportunity at that price point? Because very many international companies see India, they see the 1.4 billion people, they see the growth rates, and they make a calculation based on a small percentage of the market. But many big multinationals have come to India, thrown a lot of money at this country, and have not succeeded. And to a certain extent, I look at the way they've gone about doing that and seen that they haven't localized quickly enough. They haven't become as close to an Indian company as they could possibly be. And if you don't do that, you are destined for failure, in my opinion.
COVID has disrupted life for many of us, almost all of us. And post-COVID, companies and countries are looking at reliable and diversified supply chains. And they want to enter into other geographies, manufacture in other geographies, and not only depend on one country or one source. Do you see a future for your company in trying to bring foreign companies who want to manufacture or source from India?
Yeah, I think as we look at India in 2022, the aspirations have become very clear. This year you're seeing free trade agreements with Australia, already inked, with the Middle East, with Dubai, already inked. There's a free trade agreement in place, hopefully with the UK by Diwali this year, EU hopefully fairly soon after that. That's a big change of mindset for the government of India, and it's happening with an enormous amount of energy behind it. The opportunity is being taken much more seriously, and as you'll know yourself as a diplomat, foreign countries are lining up to come here and be part of the India story. Now, the world has woken up to the fact that supply chains have to be diversified. The world has woken up to the fact that labor is in shortage around the world. India has an abundance. A quarter of the world's population under 25 lives in this country. And so the future opportunity to use India not just as a manufacturing centre of the world, I think that's a very clear policy that Prime Minister Modi has set. I think it's got great ambitions, and there's enormous potential still to make India the manufacturing base of the world, but the knowledge centre of the world. Use Indians' brain power and bring the education sector in India more close to the corporate sector, so that Indians are used for research and development. They're developing their own intellectual property here, and the back offices of corporates thinking as well as their manufacturing is done on the ground here.
So Adrian, you mentioned the India story, and we have heard your fascinating story of the last 30 years where you have made India your world. What about the next 30 years? Will India still be part of your world?
I very much hope so, with 3 children who consider themselves Indian when they stand up on stage in front of their peers at school and they say where they're from. These blonde-haired, blue eyes, 3 children, all say from India. So yes, as a family, we're very much invested here. And personally and professionally, I have great friendships here. I'm very, very committed to it being part of India's story for the next 30 years. I'm as excited today in 2022 as I was about arriving here as a young man in 1992. And I think there's opportunity in abundance. I think India has to really think through its future and the role it plays on the global stage and how that really helps India's domestic agenda. I think whilst, of course, it's important that India has an important role on the international stage, getting the base of Indian society right, continuing that harmony domestically, educating its people, and providing the infrastructure that enable people to fulfill those opportunities is absolutely key. And every little bit of thinking, hard work, and collaboration that I can do individually and with the resources around me at my company, I very much intend to be here longer term, yes.
It's an incredible story of your association with India. And I think the India story is enriched by people like you, Adrian. Thank you for joining in this episode of India is the World.